Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to this AHDB Strategic Dairy Farm webinar, Building Farm Business Resilience. Hope that we're going to have a lot of questions and discussion as we go through today's webinar. But I'm James Haig, Knowledge Exchange Manager with AHDB, and today I'm joined by our guest speaker, Oliver Hall from the Anderson Centre, and our SDF hosts in Mould, North Wales, John and Anna Booth. Good morning to you all. Before we start with today's topic, I'd just like to run through a few points of housekeeping. So if we can just move on to slide one. Everyone is muted to avoid any sound interference. We'll also be recording this webinar, so it'll be available for you to watch on YouTube, where you'll also find previous recordings of other AHDB webinars too. And for those of you that are listening to this recording on YouTube, please do hit subscribe for more AHDB digital channels, and also follow us on social media. There will be an email sent to everyone who's registered for this webinar with any resources that we might mention today. And I also encourage you to complete the survey along with this to help us improve our future webinars. On the next slide, we'll see how we ask any questions. Please do send questions in throughout the presentations, and I'll be putting those questions to Oliver, John and Anna throughout the webinar. I'll make sure that we've got some Q&A time at the end. If you'd like to ask a question, just hit the orange button on the display panel, then click the white arrow to open the questions box, type your question in, and don't forget to click send so that it can come to us. Any questions that we don't get around to answering today, we'll reply to individually after the webinar, and I want to reassure you that other delegates that are attending this meeting can't see the questions you submit. So please be assured that you can ask anything confidentially, even if you think it sounds like a silly question. Just on the next slide, I'd like to bring your attention that AHDB is asking you to have a greater say in how your levy is spent, and in April 2022 you'll get to have your say on the challenges that you'd like AHDB to focus on and the services that we will deliver for you in the future. Shape the Future is not a vote on whether levy is collected, but it will give you a chance to influence how the levy is spent on the things that matter to you the most. If we move on to the next slide, we can see how we register for the link. All you need to do is go to our homepage, and for those of you who have listened to today's webinar, you'll be sent the link along with the follow-up email after today. Please do register to vote. It only takes a couple of minutes, so don't miss the opportunity to have your say. If you've already registered, the next slide just shows us how we can how you can help us recruit other people to sign up. We would like as many businesses as possible that are eligible to sign up. If you can encourage them yourselves, either by liking or sharing our posts on Facebook, Twitter, and just about spreading the benefits that you get from the levy as well, that would be much appreciated. So the next slide, whilst this webinar is focused on business resilience, I thought it'd be useful to mention the AHDB Farm Business Review Service, which is open to any cereals, beef, sheep and dairy farms across England. Whilst I appreciate today that our hosts are in Wales and unfortunately ineligible for this service, but for anyone that's listening live or recorded that operate their business in England, you've got until June this year to access the service, which provides a one-to-one support from a consultant who will undertake a farm business review. The web address is up on the screen now, but we will send you the link for it in the follow-up email. Okay, so before we move on to today's topic, let's just hear from John and Anna, our hosts first. John and Anna, for those of the people listening that haven't met you before, just tell us a bit about yourselves and Rhual Dairy.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm John, Anna. We farm 550 acres in North Wales in Mould. We've got 330 Holstein Friesian cows. We calve all year round and rear all our own replacements. we average about 8,500 litres, and we grow about 70 acres of maize, 30 acres of spring barley, and then the rest is grass. We graze from end of March until end of October, and we are in both the glass tier and the glass tier advanced schemes. We are a share farm agreement, so and we have been for 20 years. And that's probably us in a nutshell, really.
Great, thanks, John. And it's been a while since we last had a webinar with you. It was last year with Owen Atkinson on improving cow flow. Just tell us a little bit about that meeting, what improvements were made, and what you've seen as a result, the changes.
Yeah, it was quite a surprise to find that it wasn't so much cow flow as it was the parlour and its settings. We changed our routine, so we washed half the herd first, put units on, and then washed the other half of the side. That improved throughput, but we also didn't wait for slow cows anymore, and after a while of trying that, we changed the ACR settings to come off at half a litre per cow. And we were a bit concerned about doing this when we were first told that's what we should do, because we thought cell count would go up, we'd lose milk, and we found the exact opposite. Our mastitis rates are very good. Our cell count is probably lower than it's ever been, and the speed of milking is obviously improved. So it was a very useful exercise, and we found a big change from it.
Great, thanks very much, John. So over to Ollie, if you just want to introduce yourself, and we'll make a start on the main part of the meeting. Thanks, Ollie.
Hi guys, yeah, my name's Rhual. I am one of the farm business consultants at Anderson's, pretty much specialising in dairying. In terms of topics for today, we sort of broken it in, well, it's a 2/3, 1/3 split essentially. So we're going to have a look at sort of resilience, and the things we're going to focus in is cows and feed, people, money, and always looking at the continuation of the business. And then at the very end, we're going to have a little look at successful farm diversification, what works, what to avoid, and how to assess. So yeah, just to remind you to send questions into the box as we go through it. I will reference some things as we go along that are hopefully available on the link that you get afterwards, or get in touch with the guys at AHDB or search the website. So first thing we're going to look at is the feed section. If we just move on, cheers. So firstly, is the two graphs on the right hand side are from the AHDB Forage for Knowledge. Basically, that's a collection of farms that are all measuring grass throughout the throughout Scotland, England, and Wales. Firstly, I appreciate it's only measuring grass, but it does give us an indication of the variability in dry matter growth. I refer to dry matter, but it's just a way of quantifying grass growth or any growth of forage, and what those you can't really see from the scales, but the top one is last year, and it shows the sort of very dry period that some people had in the early spring, the blue line being the sort of seasonal 5-year average. But as you can see, we are really starting to experience fluctuations in this production of feed, and that can be localized in the country. The bottom graph is the drought of 2018. That is actually, I actually took that from a webinar that we did at the time, and that's one of my reference points really, is that, okay, well, 2018 happened, it was quite a severe drought that hit most of the country, and what I'm talking about now in terms of resilience is what can we do today to make our businesses more resilient if we experience something like that again. You know, the argument goes that you know, it seems to be that sort of variability in our weather is the new norm, and so probably is we need to think about how we prepare for that in our business. So the challenge I set really is one, monitoring. So I would urge people to actually try, quantify and measure forage growth so they can see where they are. So grass measuring, you know, can be done through plate metering or other methods and then recorded weekly. I appreciate that sort of silage yields and stuff like that is more trickier, although there is the rise of forage harvesters with dry matter meters. So it, you know, it's a good exercise to do, to just monitor like what are your crops yielding year to year, and where are you at in terms of how much you've grown this year, how much do you need to grow. So really my challenge is you've probably got to have a backup plan, and to put a quantity on that, I'm sort of saying a ton of dry matter per hectare that you farm or 30 days feed. And what I'm saying with that is that I want you to have that left over when you finish your forage cycle, which for most people, if you're grazing like John and Anna, is when the cows go out to grass in the spring and the grass growth reaches a rate that you go down to feeding your minimum amount of silage. And then as the first cut rolls in, we want to see that amount of dry matter or silage left at the back of one of the pits. We'll just move on to the next slide, if you don't mind. In terms of what we're talking about is, for John and Anna, an example here. So we've got 330 cows and 180 heifers. I calculated out 30 days feed is 160 tonne of dry matter or 500 tonne of 30% dry matter silage, and they farm 186 hectares. So if you come at it the other way, and the reason I've got two methods there is that dependent on your stocking rate and your farm system, you may always be buying a lot of silage onto maybe a concentrated area, so maybe the hectare farm thing won't be enough. So it's basically picking one or the other. So for both examples, I'm saying to John and Anna, somewhere between 500 and 600 tonnes of 30% dry matter silage left over. Ultimately, it needs to be as much as possible is milk and cow quality. It's not much use if it's all dry cow quality. Yes, a proportion of it could be for dry cows, a proportion of it could be for young stock, but it can't all be that, otherwise it won't work. How to do that? So really it's in the year that is a good forage year. So for quite a lot of places, last year would be described as a good forage year. So the question is, have you made a surplus in a good year? Have you, if you've maybe had the opportunity to buy some standing crops of forage locally if the price is subdued, because there's a lot of it. My argument is, unfortunately, put your hand in your pocket, outlay that cash and put that dry matter at the back of one of your silage pits. In terms of logistics, yeah, you do need to be able to rotate this round. Okay, it can't be the same silage that's left at the back of the pit year on year on year. You can do things, so it depends on your setup of your silage pits, but you can do things like, say you've maybe got a bay left at the back of a clamp. When they come in to reclamp the next lot of first cut or next lot of maize, you can get the contractor in early, pull that all back and then clamp it at the bottom of the pit, if that makes sense. And then if you bring the buck rake in a few hours early, it doesn't take them long to pull it all down and clamp it at the base. So you might have 4 or 5 inches of the bottom, which is last year's silage, but you know you're going to eat it up and leave a bit at the back, which is next year's silage. Bales can be handy depending on the scale of your business. You might not want to have 1,000 bales lying around if you've got a big herd to look after, but for smaller herds, bales are quite useful to do this. Or if if you've got the luxury, shall we say, of numerous silage pits, you could sort of try to plan to leave some of it at the back of one pit one year, empty that, and then leave next year's first cut or maize or whatever it is at the back of the other. So I guess just throw this over to John and Anna really. One is, where do you think you're at? A bit hard to say in February, but where were you at last year? Where do you think you're at this year? And what do you think to it as a strategy really?
Yeah, I think considering with a dry farm, it's pretty important that we've got some cover. We did run out completely the year before last, and we're buying forage in, and it was very expensive. This year, we've usually always try and take some over. I don't think we've ever succeeded in taking 530 tonnes over. We usually manage to keep about 200 to 300 tonnes to carry forward. this year it's looking likely we'll have about 200 tonnes of a second cut left to see us through till first cut again, but probably not quite enough, but
yeah,
more.
So yeah, I think the other thing is, you let's take your business example. You might, the reason for doing it is that ultimately, unless you've got some very helpful neighbours for whatever reason, ultimately when if the pinch comes, and it may not even be nationally a drought, for example this year really dry time, unbelievably dry, you'd never thought there'd be a drought in Ayrshire, but basically, you could be talking double the price. So the year that it's really tight, you wouldn't be surprised to see grass silage that would maybe trade hands. Well, this is pre-fertilizer prices going up for 25, 30 pound a tonne, starts trading at 45, 50 pound a tonne. The ultimate challenge is you're never in control of quality if you haven't made it, or if you haven't been aware of it. So people end up buying, the reason for doing this is so you don't end up buying either poor quality silage, which costs you loads and loads of milk, or loads of concentrate needed to go with it to produce the same amount of milk, or paying a super high price for it. And so actually, if you might argue, let's say tie up 30, 40,000 pounds of cash that you think, well, Ollie, that's a lot of money to tie up, but actually in the year you go and use that deficit because something's gone wrong in your area for growing forage, you'll probably nearly double your money, and then you have to go again the next year trying to rebuild those stocks.
Ollie, would you, we've had a question come in, would you treat these targets any differently if you're on an organic system?
Okay, probably not the targets, because ultimately the only thing there is often organic farmers, because of the low in stocking rates, end up farming a lot more hectares. So for example, the 1 tonne of dry matter, if you're maybe only growing 8 to 9 tonnes organically of grass, is quite a large amount relative. So you're more focused on, right, well, what's 30 days feed? I think it's even more important organically, James, because of the milk to feed price ratio is a lot different to conventional farming, and equally your options when you are short of feed are even more limited. So if we think back to sort of 2018, some people chose to drop out of organic and were given derogations, which meant they could feed their herd at a relatively good cost, but it cost them a lot of money in lost milk price to convert back to organic. Or you're looking at hauling silage huge distances. I heard silage moving from Exeter to the Midlands of England because they were hunting organic silage. So I think it's even more important organically, but I would probably use the 30 days target rather than the tonne of dry matter per hectare, because it's just relevant to the land area.
Okay, and also in terms of a fully housed herd, what advice would you have? How would you approach a fully housed herd having surplus silage targets?
Yeah, so you're slightly different if you just think your logic through. So if John and Anna are out grazing, they have a different silage demand, but it'd be ultimately, normally with the fully housed herd, it's when you open the first cut, if that makes sense. So they make their first cut, whether that's late April or first week of May, and they're waiting 6 weeks for it to ferment and open it. So it's normally at that point is effectively the start of your forage year again, when you've opened your first cut. So it's just a slightly different time of year, but same principles would apply, is that forage is important again in that system, but it's just a slightly different time of year, and it'll be a different it'll be same calculation, 30 days, but it's at a different time of year. Yeah.
Okay, that's it from me. Thanks, Ollie.
Okay, and so yeah, just to reference a few things that you'll either pick up in the email later, but there is a feed and forage calculator in terms of how to, measuring silage bits is not always easy. I have on the next slide, we won't leave it up for too long, but there's some quick calculations here. So just simply, you're just looking to work out, normally most people do it by working out the metric volume. So it's just height times width times depth. You may have to go back to a bit of your GCSE math days and do some triangles and funny shapes descending on the side of your pit. But if you work out the cubic area first in cubic meters. These quick tables here give you an idea of, these are all kilos of dry matter, so how many kilos of dry matter are inside a cubic meter. So it does make a bit of a difference how high it's clamped and how well it's clamped. I normally find with the bigger the machines are getting and the better we are getting at consolidation of silage pits, we're actually getting more metric tons inside a cubic meter than maybe some of these things would suggest. But I don't mind being a bit cautious when I am estimating feed stocks. So that's pretty much it in terms of feed. So on to the cows next. So it's a bit of a generic discussion, but ultimately, you know, good principles of resilience in a dairy farm is to view that herd as a working asset. That is what they are. You are ultimately constantly having to either spend money or time or thought time into protecting those future returns. You know, a really good herd of cows can take years to build up, and sadly can take a few years of poor management or something going wrong. You could have a serious problem. So I've mainly sort of highlighted to start with sort of herd health status and Yoni's protocols and measuring as a, okay, what are we doing here to protect the future ability of our herd to make money? I know from a lot of benchmarking meetings that I do that it's challenging when you're sat there and we're benchmarking vet bills and what vaccinations do you have, what do you not have. You know, ultimately, if you go full belt and braces now, you very quickly spent £30 a cow. You might end up throwing in some other things like some people do salmonella vaccines, stuff like that. You could be £35 a cow straight up, and you've not even treated a single case of mastitis or anything. You know, that's just your vaccines. So it's a tricky area to pick your way through. So I'll just really throw it over to John and Anna and just sort of say, well, how have you approached some of these things in terms of looking after your future herd? Might just need to unmute you guys. Oh no, still not got you, sorry. No, still on mute, guys, sorry. Well, anyway, Guy, if you just focus on muting yourself, guys, I'm just going to cover the TB stuff because we can't hear you. The TB stuff then, so John and Anna are lucky, they haven't had TB where they are up in North Wales. They've been close with it. TB's challenging in terms of resilience because I know it wears people out a lot trying to keep a dairy business going whilst down with TB. The other thing is, so what strategies can you do to make yourself more resilient?
We're unmuted now.
Brilliant. Well, come back to you in a second. So just on TB, so what I find probably the best, and it is a coping mechanism, and if I'm honest, is if you're in an area where you are routinely down and you're routinely having reactors taken off your farm, and I mean within a 1 or 2 year cycle, I found the best strategy is probably to rear surplus, constantly have a supply of heifers coming through. It's challenging in terms of if you don't rear the surplus, you're then constantly at the mercy of ministry vets to give you license for more cows or heifers to keep the herd of you end up in this sort of shrinking herd scenario, and it becomes quite challenging then to maintain a good cost of production if you built your own herds about a set amount of cows. The only trickiness is really surplus you've got, then good and then the reactors may end up with like a growing herd. So you have to find a way of either going, most people then use it as an excuse to just do some herd improvement, or maybe hang on to some extra cows for a little bit. But yeah, so that's my resilience bit on TB. I've just come back to you guys on your herd health stuff then.
Yeah, sorry about before. We vaccinate for lepto and IBR. We don't have a trouble with Yoni's, thankfully, but we have had big trouble with Neospora. We've got Neospora right down now, by treating it much like Yoni's. And we are BVD free, although we do vaccinate the heifers for BVD because they're on the periphery of the farm where they may come into contact with other cattle.
Yeah.
So that sort of just future proofs them really. But
where are you
it's taken a long time to get there.
Yoni's protocols and testing and journey with that?
Well, Yoni's thankfully has never really been an issue for us, so we never had to do too much for that. But as I say, the IBR we've treated like Yoni's and have more or less eradicated it by doing the same process. So by snatching the calves and cleaning the boxes and culling out particularly ones and not breeding from anything that's had it.
Okay. And have you ever made any decisions to either cut a vaccine or put a vaccine in place at any point?
We did have a salmonella problem some years ago. We put salmonella vaccine in and we stopped it after about 3 or 4 years of using it on the recommendation from the vet saying that, well, we've got rid of it now, pull out from it, and touch wood, it's never come back.
Okay. James coming in here.
Yeah, just a question from the audience for you, Ollie. In your experience, does spending more on vaccines end up a more resilient business or just a higher vet cost? I guess what they're trying to say is, does resilience always equal more profit?
I think maybe not always, if you maybe look at it in a year's isolation. But what this is about is that we have a good business and we want to protect it and we want to repeat it year on year on year. That is the true definition of success. I'm not too excited by a 1 year flash in the pan, go to the benchmarking meeting and you've knocked everything out of the park just because you've cut everything. I think it's, I always remember doing the benchmarking off of the back of the really low milk prices, sort of 2014, and there was some lessons to be learnt there, because when you haven't got the money, it's easy to make decisions to cut things, and some people cut some things out that actually they didn't need. So I think my strategic advice to people would be, look, no vaccines just for the sake of no vaccines to have a low vet cost is probably not a good resilient business. But if you've strategically done something, so there's a lot of testing you can do for these things, and you really have to get into the detail of the knowledge. So if you take BVD for example, there's loads of things you can learn about. Well, how could I try to eradicate it? How could I then manage that risk by not spending on a vaccine, by doing bulk milk tests or testing a certain amount of heifers? There will always be some stories, when I go to discussion groups around people that have had some breakdowns if they've had those sort of things in place, but it's how quickly you pick it up and sort those things out. So I would say it's an element of spend with a real understanding of the knowledge and the risk you're taking if you're choosing to cut a vaccine and to then manage that risk. So like take John and Anna, had salmonella, put vaccine in place for a few years, but then I guess at some point you questioned it, you had a discussion with the vet, you understood where you were, and you took the decision to take it out. Sometimes it's quite hard to take these things out once you're put them in, because you have, dealing with salmonella in calves is a horrid experience if you've ever had to do it. And so it is a very hard decision to go cut that. But maybe come back to John and Anna on how did you make that decision to take it back out?
And not a question, just a reference for those people listening and for John and Anna. We've recently held a webinar on vaccines with James Green and our SDF hosts, mine here as well. So we'll make sure that the link to that on YouTube is in the follow-up email for everyone.
Yeah, when we took the salmonella one down, I remember being quite worried about taking it out. But we'd had no cases of salmonella for some time, and yeah, it was a good decision to take it out because it was quite a costly, quite a fiddly vaccine to have to manage all the time. So we've not looked back really from taking it out, and it's quite an expensive job, that one. Okay. But it wasn't taken out for cost purpose. It was really just to reduce what we were doing, really.
There's much management of trying to when you put it in and where, and
Yeah.
Okay, just moving on then. So another challenge I put to John and Anna after I spent some time with them is currently they're averaging 4.01 butter fat and 3.26 over the year. So I talk in milk solids, which is basically where you add the fat and protein together. So they're producing milk at about 7.27% milk solids in total. My challenge is that, I appreciate they're on a liquid milk contract at present, but my observations would be that given that the UK may shift to more of a milk solids environment as liquid milk continues the downward trend, that actually they are slightly below the country average of fat and protein percentage of the national herd, which is about, I think it's about 7.35, 7.4 at the minute, but quite a long way behind if you were looking at a standard cheese producing litre, which may be 4.5, 3.5 when you were looking at milk price league tables. And my reason for saying this is that you don't always know the milk buyer you may have in 5 years' time. You know, things change, you may move your herd, you may there may be realignment of who the processor is, who owns it, what their strategy is. You know, I remember when Arla was a liquid milk buyer in the country, and you know, to start off with, it is, you know, they went through the whole co-op phase, and you know, now if you're an Arla producer, there is no liquid milk contract anymore, and so these things can change. So that's one thing to have in mind. And the second thing is that, you know, potentially the scenario I could see happening is that as liquid milk declines, that the UK milk market will be more dominated by those producing cheese, yogurt, or whatever constituents they pull out of the milk, because one is we're actually eating a bit more of that in this country at the minute and drinking less liquid milk, but also that's probably where the export opportunities are. So my challenge to John and Anna was that probably from a resilience viewpoint, from a one, potentially to give them options, and also to make them a bit safer if their milk buyer ever changed their contract, that a focus to lift that fat and protein to get towards maybe a standard sort of cheese producing 4.5, 3.5 would be a good target to start with. And you know, I guess ultimately without losing much profit on the way, if you can. I know you'll get a marginal bonus for your butter fat, but you basically won't get paid for that protein. But it may put you in a more resilient position if anything changes. Just basically over to John and Anna to respond to my challenge, really.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. We probably haven't been paying a great deal of attention to fat and protein for the last 10 years, really. We used to be on a cheese contract and had much higher fat and proteins. I think there's quite a bit of potential there via feeding that we could improve that, but obviously on the contract we're on, we're not trying to. But we have started to source bulls about 6 months ago with a bit more emphasis on fat and protein. Again, not highly on my list, but perhaps it should be. I think it's a fair point.
The challenge being it takes so long. I actually looked back through some records of a herd where we've got yearly costings, and you know, to put 0.5% on sort of both took them about 5 years. Basically, if you're not buying and swapping cows, it's purely through breeding. It took them about 5 years to lift that, but it, you know, can be done. I would always point towards the high yielding herds, breeding in Holland and stuff like that. Terrific yields per cow, but you know, at good fat and protein. And if you're at the other end of the scale with your grazing systems, you know, you go to New Zealand, go to Ireland, and look at the fat and protein that they do on some of their milk, and you know, it's terrific. So, but it makes such a difference to the pence per litre, especially if you were to drop back onto a cheese contract now, you would get a bit of a shock, basically, compared to what the headline price might be versus what you actually get. Just to reference some stuff here for people to pick up, there is some milk contracts and milk price calculator stuff that we will send a link to if you're registered or have a look on the AHDB website. So handy thing to have a play around with, just to understand what sort of value of money we could be talking with here. Right, so next we'll move on to people. Some targets that I set if you've got a really big business, you can almost do it monthly. So you're looking at like a percentage of people that have either left the business, moved on into different roles, whatever it is, of a goal of 15 to 20%. So if you had 100 people in the year, a good result would be that 15 people moved on and changed. That if you work it backwards, then if a smaller team, an easier way to assess it is how long are they here. So that really, if you work that out, however big your team is, it might be only one person alongside you, but you're really looking for that 5 to 6 years service is, through a number of studies, is sort of seen as is like optimal, you know, with if they're a good person, obviously, but the time taken to train people up, the time taken for people to understand your systems, your business, how you do things, and for them to real bed into a business and get really good results, that is what we're really looking at. So we had a quick look at John and Eleanor's team, and if you can understand how I've laid this out, that the previous herdsman and the previous tractor driver had done 6 years and 10 years on the farm, and then the current herdsman is now at 2.5 years, and the current tractor driver has just left the business and he did 7 months. So my challenge to John and Anna was, you know, if you're looking backwards, you would say you've been a successful employer of people in those previous roles, and then you're now looking to with the current people or the new people arriving in your businesses, you know, do you think that can be repeated? Why do you think those people stayed with you for so long when you look backwards at your previous employers on the screen?
Well, I suppose they're sat here now, so I hope so. But yeah, going back, I think we try and it's hard work. We're a small team. There's only the 4 of us, but I do try to make it that it's everyone's involved with the business and everyone knows what's going on. Although I can be a bit random when it comes to organising the day, and that's probably where I fall down really. In terms of the previous lads, I think it just came to the time that they needed a new challenge, and that's why they moved on. Because, you know, understandably, everybody wants to change at some point, don't they?
Yeah, and in some sense that's why that target is there, because actually if I went to a business and everyone was doing 10 years, you'd maybe argue that you aren't getting fresh thinking, new ideas into the business as often enough. So there is actually in extreme events not enough turnover of people sometimes. So I do think that is healthy. So just moving on in terms of resilience, one thing that we picked up when I was with John and Anna, that it's quite challenging for them personally when they have a small team and people away or people absent, or they're waiting to fill that recruitment gap, if that makes sense. And I think that's often when I see people potentially making rash decisions on employing people because they're desperate, basically. And so actually I think it's important to have some contingency plans to deal with absences in businesses, and how will you survive if one person is off sick for a month? You know, ask yourself those questions. So a few pointers I would give is, how easy is it to operate the farm? So often we might end up with areas of the farm or intricacies of how something works, but it's actually quite hard to explain to people how to start up the milking parlour, or how to run the milk tank, or, you know, the water pump that trips out a little bit every now and again. So all those little intricacies of difficulties of running the farm, you have to focus on trying to make it as easy as possible to someone to come in and operate that job or that task. And I would challenge anyone as, how good are your protocols, how good are your communication, and who are you going to call? So, you know, one thing I would see some people using successfully in areas of the country, and I say areas of the country because it's often about your local area and where people can be employed from, what they're doing. But some people are making quite a success of using a part-time workforce that for whatever reason don't want a full-time job, or it suits their lifestyle that they don't have a full-time job, or they may have multiple part-time jobs. That seems to be where we are going as a society, is that is what people want. They want a bit of a flexibility. And so it's not maybe your traditional relief milkers that you may have had 10, 15 years ago, but it's people that could, you know, can you have local people that just want to do a morning milking, come in and do a morning milking, either pay them per hour or pay them a set rate per milking, but your protocols and communication is good enough that they don't have to be the world's best stock person. They don't have to have 10 years of herd person experience. They just need to know how to operate the milking parlour, what to do when a cow comes in with a red tape on or a leg band on, all those things being really clear, that actually people then build a part-time workforce up, that then when you do have those absences, you've got a few people in your phone that you can call and start to build a bit of a rota for the week, that it doesn't then fall all on you as the business owner to go from working 60 hours a week to 90 hours a week just to keep the wheels going on the dairy farm. And maybe also other people have good relationships with their agricultural contractors that can provide a workforce. You know, some people would have people coming in and feeding cows for them, maybe mucking a shed out, all those things that you might do with your own machinery, but when desperate you could phone a contractor and they could either come drive your machines or bring in their own machines and do those things. So I'll just throw it over to John and Anna really. So since our discussions, I know you've got some of those people in place. What you do in that area?
Yeah, while we've been looking for somebody, and Adam, who's sat here now with us, has just started. Our previous chap, who worked for us for 10 years, he's been coming back all winter on a part-time basis, and is going to continue to do so as well. So we'll be a little bit more covered there. But going forward, I think we do need to have a few more people we can call on. And traditionally, it's hard to find people in our area because there's so much industry and so many other jobs out there. But I think times are changing again with the current climate, so there might be more scope for some part-time people to basically relieve everybody a little bit.
James?
Just it leads quite nicely on from John's last comment, really. There's so many other options for people out there that are looking for employment. What can we do, Ollie, in your opinion, to set us out so that we stand out to employees as an employer of choice?
Yeah, well, I'll just move it on to the next slide really to start with. But I think ultimately, I think it's easy to sit back and go, oh, the industry's got to do something. But I would put the challenge on every dairy farmer that you're maybe one of the only dairy farmers in your village or edge of town or area. So you've got to do your bit in your area. And what I would find amazing is that when some people really focus on making their farm a really great place to work and put a serious amount of effort into it and maybe a little bit of money into some things, and then focus on attracting people to come and work, pay them the fair going rate, pay them well, and it's amazing how that can infiltrate round your local community, because it does, you know, people are always brothers, sisters, cousins, friends, and they're like, oh, you're looking for some work, why don't you go to John and Anna's farm and do some milkings? It's really good fun, it's a nice place to work, you get paid really well, boom, boom, boom. And it's amazing how if you put some effort into that in your local area or within a 5-10 minute drive, you can start to change the perceptions of, oh, you don't want to work on a farm, you know, or you don't want to do that, it's poorly paid, horrible place to be, all those sort of things. So if you can do your bit for your area, and just put up here really, so where are people going? So ultimately we can throw more and more money at it and just keep ramping up the wages, and we will have to keep pace with inflation. It's likely to be 5-7% by April. So anyone who works for you, I'm going to say this, and it'll be broadcast in John and Anna's kitchen, but if we are in a world of, if you don't pay 5% more than the year before, the people that work for you are going to have less money in their pocket to spend on things that they want to spend on in their life, because that's what inflation's at, and we've got to deal with that. We've got to deal with that on a farm level. One thing I would say from all the benchmarking we do is that actually when we get down to it, on average, we all pretty much pay the same. As in, when we boil down to it, there is a going rate, and as long as you're competitive, we pretty much pay the same. Where people's labour budgets differ on like a pence per litre basis or whatever benchmark we're doing is because the amount of hours that they use. So ultimately, I would say you don't want to be focusing on your labour bill and going, I'm going to cut that by paying people less or by not paying inflationary pay rises. We have to find ways to make things more efficient, whether that's using technology to take some time out of the job, or infrastructure to take some time out of the job, or brutally honestly, it's just sheer organisation to take some time out of the job. That would be, in our benchmarking groups, we would see a range of at least 20 hours a cow a year between the best and worst. That is a serious amount of time. If you think 20 hours a cow doesn't sound a lot, well, times it by 300 cows, that's 2 extra people all year between the most labour efficient and the best labour efficient. So it is possible to do it inside a budget and pay people well, but if you want to, you may have to look at some efficiency stuff if you want to get a monetary result at the end. People are, I think most people are going towards negotiations along the following lines, which is it time you want or is it money you want? And most people, when you get to a certain standard of salary and standard of living, and with hobbies, family commitments, things you want to do with other people, sheer amount of tiredness, if you've done a 12-on roster getting up at 5 o'clock every morning, people actually want a bit more time off. It is normally what I've found in businesses. So it's probably about challenging the working hours on a rolling week. So up here, this is our winter routine at John and Anna's, we're sort of 58 hours and 53 hours, and they're doing a 12-on, 2 off with a half day off once a week. Gets a bit better in the summer when the routine gets a bit easier. So I would challenge, not just on John and Anna, but anyone, is that maybe hours per person per week is where you could become a more competitive employer. And you might not have to give a pay rise this year, but you may choose to give some more time off. Or once you've established a lower hours per week rota and you go out to employ somebody new, you can go, well, no, actually, no, the salary is this, but you won't be working 70 hours a week. So it's not necessarily we're going to end up paying people more per hour. It's just making the hours and the money sort of line up again. And really, you have to, the way to make that work is probably that the 12-on, 2-off roster becomes challenging, because it's all about covering the weekend. So most people either then use rosters that are not rotated around the weekend, but rotate round on like a 8-on, 3-off, or perhaps they might rotate using part-time people to fill holes in the week, where, because we want to give time off to our main guys, we use part-time people to fill slots in the rota. That will be where I see the best in terms of, like, what do people want in hours. Other things I've just put up here before you come in, James, is exit surveys and employer satisfaction survey. You really need to ask questions of why somebody left your business, and you need to ask questions on an ongoing basis. Is, look, are you happy with this? Is there anything we can do better? And I tie that in with doing proper sort of development reviews on top of that, normally on a 6-monthly or a yearly basis. I'll just let you come in, James.
Yeah, I think you've already answered the question I'm about to put to you, Ollie,
Okay.
But just in terms of transparency, the questions come in. Our milk price does not receive inflation. Our costs increase faster than inflation. How can we pay more and remain profitable?
So I think it's around, I would say go out and do your benchmarking. I think at the minute I was worried maybe October time when milk prices weren't going up fast enough, but I would say there is people in the industry, not everybody, that are making fantastic returns as business owners and are able to pay highly competitive salaries on you know, good working hours a week. So at the minute I would say that, you know, if your business is really efficient, which is your responsibility as the business owner, then you are able to do that. I appreciate it's an ongoing challenge. You know, if inflation carries on and milk price doesn't go up, it is an ongoing challenge of constantly looking for more efficiencies. But, you know, I did 60 farms benchmarked in January to December year ends in some discussion groups. There was a huge ranges in efficiencies, and that's what we were focused on. You know, there's not a lot we can do about the milk price, but we were focused on why are our businesses different in different areas and how can we get those efficiencies. We just wanted to reference some stuff there, James, on staff appraisals and communication styles. There will be some stuff in the follow-up email or on the website. John, I know I'll just throw it open to you. I've piled a load of stuff into you there, but is there anything that sort of resonates with you or things you may go do?
Well, I think it all does, really. I think everybody would like to do less, really. But yeah, something that we want to look into over the next sort of 2 or 3 months, really, and see what ideas we can come up with.
Okay. Just moving it on then to John and Anna. So the other thing is about probably all looking after ourselves as the business owners. I'm not going to say out loud how many hours we worked out we thought you did, John and Anna, at the peak of this, but we have to really make sure we have a responsibility to ourselves and each other, in terms of, you know, yes, we are business owners and yes, we're ultimately responsible, but we have to probably monitor our own time off and hours worked and burnout and time away and hobbies, because otherwise, you know, very often I would now and again in my job bump into somebody that I just think, wow, you're completely melted here. You know, you lose the ability to, you know, think well strategically, make good decisions if you are constantly tired and you're constantly doing way too much work. So my goal would be that within all those rotas we talked about, that you guys should be trying to emulate the same. You know, if as a business owner you choose, I would imagine maybe at the start of your 20-year share farming journey, you know, I'm fully prepared that if you have set out for a year and you're going to work really hard to save some extra labor and make some extra money, because that's what required to meet your business plan, I totally respect that. And I think it's fine for periods of time, as long as people are aware of that sacrifices in your partners in life and all those sort of things. But if it's a constant, it probably becomes, actually, that's not resilient, that's not sustainable. So I'll maybe just throw that one back to John and Anna if they want to answer it.
Yeah, no, you're right. We used to have a lot more time off way back, and that was very useful because you were always more enthused, and as you say, you were more switched on. Decisions were easier. Whether it's because I'm getting older and I'm getting slower, I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think it is important for us as well that we want to have more time doing other things as well. So yeah, it's got to build it. The whole thing's got to be built together to improve everything. So the last bit
here that we sort of identified with John and Anna is that within their partnership, as in what they do, they both have very specialist skills, and they maybe don't hugely maybe take it in turns to do things like some of the accountancy work or the specialist skills of how all the intricacies of the parlour work and stuff. And so one thing I did throw at John and Anna in terms of resilience is that actually if one of you had a major incident and was away from the business, how would the other cope? So I set them the task of each writing a simple but a couple of page manual of how to do what I do in the business if I'm not here or away for a bit, and equally to maybe spend some time having a go at doing the other person's roles or jobs, and I just wonder how that's gone, guys.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably something you maybe recognise when we spoke about it, that, you know, could be a risk to the business if you don't.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I think I'd probably just get somebody in to do paperwork.
Yeah.
But yeah,
They'd also need to know a starting point. So, you know, it's
yeah,
good to have a few things written down. It's just helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, moving on then. So the next ones are some money things, and I've put some stuff up here around. If we just move the slide on, yeah, I've got some stuff on here around some pointers that I would give in terms of what does a resilient business look like from some money KPIs. So first thing I like to see is higher margins of profit as possible. And why that's important, I think, is because a business that's making a high profit percent margin, so what I mean by that is if you turn over £100, do you keep £1 of it or do you keep £10 of it? So if we're talking about, you know, 100 grand profit, are you making 100 grand profit from a £500,000 turnover, or are you making 100 grand profit from £1 million turnover or £2 million turnover? I think it's more resilient to be in the ballpark of a higher percentage of profit of your turnover. It gives you the ability to ride out if a price changes or if there's a problem much easier. And what I mean by that is that small percentage profits can be wiped out quite quickly with a quick movement in the cost of something, or the potential bad weather event or bad price event, whatever that is. So a target that we've set for a long time at Anderson's is a pre-rent and finance 30% of turnover as profit. Put a rough figure up here. If you're getting a 36p a milk price, 2.5p for your cull and calves, and maybe a penny for other stuff, whether it's glass steer, single farm payment, you might actually be looking at a business now that's nearly 40p total income. So we're looking to make 11.5p as a percentage of profit, and that's pre-rent and finance. So that's before you've gone and paid any interest or before you've gone and paid any rent. Ideally, you've already paid yourself a labour bill inside that, not necessarily, but ideally you have paid yourself a labour salary inside that. I think the challenge for that is, you know, there is people out there doing that. It is probably easier, if we're not going to get into a systems debate today, but it is easier in a slightly lower input of dairying business model. So some of the spring calvers and autumn calvers that are of the lower yield spectrum do find that easier to do. The higher up the yield spectrum you go, normally the bigger the turnover, and yes, there could be big profits, but it's normally done at a slightly lower percentage of turnover profit. So my target's 30. Not many people hit that, but some people do. But you at least want to be sort of in the 20% mark to 30%, 30% being what you're aiming for. The second point there is it's about consistency, and we talked about that earlier today. I'm really interested in 5-year averages, brutally, when it boils down to it. One big profit in a year, great, well done, but it's consistent profits that grow wealth, it's consistent profits that service debt, and it's consistent profits that tell me that you are repeating performance year in, year out. So a 5-year average is really what I'm looking for, and I guess maybe as farmers, we're always a bit liable to, we've always got an excuse for each year. That's why something didn't work out. There's always something probably gone wrong. So the 5-year average is often what lenders are looking at, and it is how I would analyze a business brutally. Say, well, what's your 5-year average profit? The third bit there is around trying to generate a return on capital that is higher than your cost of funds. So if you are borrowing money to put assets in place to run a business, it's important that you are making a margin on that for yourself. Otherwise, you could term a phrase that you're just working for the bank, or you're paying the bank the privilege to run the business if your return on capital is lower than your cost of funds. So a target that we would have is around a 4% higher than the cost of funds, and so that's really your interest rate. So say you were tenant farming business and you're borrowing money at 4.5%, I'd be targeting to make at least 4% higher than that. So my return on capital target for that business would be 8.5%. I will reference some stuff here in terms of the AHDB KPI targets. There is a thing on there called return on tenants capital. So I've just done a quick analogy down the bottom. How you calculate that is you add up all your cows, machinery and tenants infrastructure. For example, it might come to 500,000. You then divide your profit after rent, even if you own the land, because the rent is in theory is the return for the land. So you might make a 45 grand return after rent on your 500,000. So you would be doing about a 9% return on tenants capital. So you've come in there, James.
Yeah, just a question, Ollie, about you've mentioned the return on tenants capital targets, but how would you approach a return on capital if looking at buying land?
Yeah, so if you are going out to buy land, a couple of things really is you know, the returns, you know, brutally, depending where you're buying it in the country, you might be looking at a rental return of about maybe 2%. You know, it's 1.5 to 2%. So if you buy an acre of ground for 10 grand and you might say it's worth £200 an acre, so it's yielding you a 2%. So you have to have a reason to probably go out and buy the land. So that may be a long-term objective or just something you want to do, or you may be looking at it and going, well, I think there may be some potential uplift in its value above and beyond farming it on a yearly basis. So you might go, well, look, it's going to save me £200 an acre of rent because I'm renting some land down the road and I can give that up. And the reason I'm buying it is that long term, I believe that land values will go up like they have done historically. No guarantees, but could work out for you okay. Or equally, you might have development potential on the back of it. So some people would buy land, service it using the dairy business, and there may one day be some uplift if you can hive some off for development, all the rest of it. So ultimately, you might not be buying land from a return on capital viewpoint, but you might be looking at it as a long-term wealth store, or some people buy land because of the tax advantages of passing wealth to other generations. Ultimately, from my point of view, in terms of resilience, it's all about, can you hack the serviceability? So I see some people that probably make good profits, but then commit to really quite large levels of debt, because the return on capital is so low effectively, and so it's quite hard to service. So you have to use profits from other areas of your business or personal sacrifices to service that debt and pay the loan off, which probably just moves me nicely onto my next slide, and we'll cover that as a bit of an example really. And really it comes down to this. Well, do you want to come in, James, if you've got a question before I do this?
Just a quick question. Well, probably not a quick question.
Yeah.
Own farm versus rented farm, Ollie, is one more resilient than the other?
I think both make a success of, people can make a success of both of them. Ultimately, a tenanted business, once fully capitalized and once you pay the debt off, can be a terrific cash generating machine, because you're not having to service potentially a big loan and you're just paying a rent. The challenge often to those people is, well, what are you going to do with it? And more often than not, they go, I want to buy a farm, or that they may use it to store wealth up in pensions or property or other things like that. So a tenanted business can, a fairly debt-free tenanted business is very resilient, because the profit demand could be so low, and they could have built up good reserves. The other way round is ultimately, it is easier to borrow money when you own land. There's no doubt about it. You get cheaper interest rates, you get a lot more grace when it comes to serviceability calculations, or you certainly did historically. It's probably got a bit tougher since 2008. But if you're talking about resilience, that ability to, if you've got the headroom, if you've got a bad year and you need to borrow another 30 grand on the overdraft, if you're a tenant and you're already quite well borrowed, that's a really difficult thing to do. If you're an owner occupier with a little bit of borrowing, that's a relatively easy thing to do, as long as you can prove the long-term serviceability. That's how things changed in 2008, really, that a lot of farmers just used to be able to borrow money because they had a land asset that was always going up in value. Lend me 50% of the value, it's safe as houses, you can always have the land back, blah blah blah. But the regulations that came in on the back of 2008 were all around, you have to be able to show that you can generate the cash to pay it back. And if your previous accounts don't show that and your budget looks a bit iffy, they may not lend you the money even though you've got the collateral. So brings me on to this a little bit. We'd have a target of always trying to generate more than what you need. Okay, so how to calculate your profit demand as a business is these are after profit cash demands that you will have normally as a business owner. Could be a bit different if you're a limited company, but in principle, let's deal with it as if you're a partnership or a sole trader. You'll have got, in my budget here, 50 grand of drawings into the house to pay for whatever it needs for the family, and 20 grand of capital loan repayment. So that's not the interest, that's paid pre-profit, but the capital loan repayment. And the bit that a lot of people forget when they're doing the profit demand is you have to generate the tax bill to go with those things. You can't take the money out of the business and not pay tax. Well, you can, it means you're making a loss and you're drawing out the capital accounts, but on an ongoing basis, you have to pay the tax with what you're going to take out, and that includes your capital loan repayments. So that is one of the areas when you go to buy land and service the debt, not only do you have to pay the mortgage, you have to pay the tax bill to go with the principal that you're repaying. The interest is tax deductible, the capital or the principal isn't. So here is it's about making 25 to 50% more than what you need as a profit demand. And that is how banks will assess it. They may call it slightly different things. They might be looking for serviceability cover or amount of EBITDA, but ultimately it comes back to this. So they want to know that you can generate more than just what you need and just what they need. So they're normally looking for 25% more. A good target would be 50% more. And what that means is that you can handle a bump in the road, you can handle something going wrong, and you're probably, in theory, should be generating cash at one point in the year. You might have a yearly cash flow cycle, but on a yearly basis, you should generate extra cash in the current account above and beyond what you need to take out. That puts you in a really strong, resilient position. So I would always look at this, especially if you're maybe taking out new loans or new borrowing, and go, hang on a minute, we might be able to afford it, but do we still have that 25% left over, or are we really pushing it? If you're really pushing it, yes, you can really push it for a period of time, but you need to focus on then clearing some debt and getting that ongoing capital repayment down. The bit on the right here that I've just put is around, are you in control of that depreciation and investment cycle? So a little bit too often, I would see too many short-term finance agreements in dairy businesses. I think we're as guilty as many in agriculture of having them, because it's so easy just to think, oh, I've got a 30 grand a month milk check. What's £1,000 a month to buy a new load all or buy a new feeder wagon, etc. So what we would like to see is you being in control of the depreciation and reinvestment cycle. So above and beyond what you've got on the left-hand side in terms of your profit demand, is that you will have a depreciation amount in your business, and you will have a reinvestment cycle that might be swapping a tractor every 5 years or whatever that is. We want to see you in control of it rather than being at the mercy of stacking up too many monthly repayments. So we try to get businesses to a point where you can clear out some of that short-term debt, get the demand down, and then build cash that you then go make the decision to replace the asset with. Because I actually think you make better decisions when you have to write out a big check or press send on the backs payment, as it is these days, around that depreciation and reinvestment cycle. Just on to my last bit on money, conscious of time a little bit. The last bit on money then is just around outside income. Yes, it is handy, and plenty of good dairy farm businesses have been built on the back of maybe somebody else having a job or an outside income that can then be used to mean that not all our serviceability is required from purely dairying alone. I would normally say to people, though, if you're really good at it and you back yourself, there's nothing wrong with it all being from dairy, but you do need to be really good at it. And back yourself that, we're good at doing this, we know what we're doing, we know we're going to make this profit if all goes in our favour. And ultimately, on the resilience point, you always want to be having a long-term eye on those wealth creation goals that you should have, which are normally based around your long-term objectives. So we try to focus people's minds on, well, yes, you're here with the business today, but where do you want to be in 10 years? What have you got to deal with, maybe with succession, or what does your retirement plan look like? Where do you want to build your pension to? You know, do you want to buy a farm? You have to work all those things back to your yearly targets, basically, and it helps probably build a bit more structure in those things. We can move on then, just as a little bit on business continuation. What we got here is, I guess I just challenged John and Anna when we met around what we're always looking for in a good business is to just keep repeating it, and what things do we need to protect ourselves from, what IE do we need to have on keeping our customers happy with what we're selling them so we can do it again next year, and all those sort of things. So we just lined up those in terms of our long-term dairying infrastructure and our license to operate, as such as we may call it now, and that we probably have to have a view that, you know, anyone who's got a dairy farm has to start taking a view of, well, what does this yard need to look like in 2030 for me to be compliant and to keep these amount of cows here, and who are my customers, what do they need from me? I think we need to get away from this mentality of, oh, well, of course they're going to buy the milk off me. Well, no, actually, they don't always have to. So what do I need to do to keep my customers happy to keep this business going? And the last thing is, you know, these guys have been in, you know, quite, I don't want to say the longest share farming agreement I've seen, but it's up there at 20 years. And, you know, that it's important. I see some people that are in either share farming or contract farming agreement relationships maybe forget about the, you know, it takes a lot of effort to set a farm up, takes a lot of effort to get a business to a place where John and Anna have got theirs, and it's about keeping it there and keeping it going. You know, just doing some big profit shares, 5 years, splashing the plan, and then you're off somewhere else. If you span that out over 20 years, sometimes you might be better off just you know, really focusing on keeping that relationship really good, understanding everybody's objectives and plan, and what the challenges and requirements are to each other. I'm not going to ask John and Anna to cover because I feel like we're running out of time, but we may cover it in the Q&A at the end. So the last bit is just on successful farm business diversifications. We do see a few of these and so I just really pass comment. We had a bit of a conversation with John and Anna about what they could do, what they might look at. What my advice is well, what do I see really working? You need one or at least a few of these things. A real genuine passion. You know, if you're selling to the public, or you've got a service that people are using and it takes your time up and you're the front person, if you've got a real genuine passion for that product or place, it just sells. It just sells stuff, and it makes it easy and you enjoy it. If you don't have a genuine passion, not saying you can't do it, but Christ, it's a bit harder to do. The other thing is you might need a great product. So you know, ultimately it's competitive. Once we're out of the mindset of, you know, if we're dairy farmers, just put it in the milk tank. You know, you actually think about it, it's the easiest business to operate from a sales point of view. You put it in the tank, they pick it up, they even send you the invoice and pay you the money back. You don't have to chase any money, there's no debtors, there's no nothing. So actually, when you get into the other world of different businesses, you know, it is competitive out there. So you need, what I'm saying is, you need a genuine passion or a great product, or you need the opportunity with a moat around it. And so what I mean by that is that you've got something on your farm or within your product that is quite hard to recreate for that area. So you've either got the ideal location for a commercial yard for people storing cars, or you've got the ideal location to put a vending machine, or you've got the ideal location for a glamping site, which I've used as my example in a minute. So if you haven't got one of those or any of those things, I would maybe advise you, this might not just be for you at this time. But if you can see an opportunity that ticks at least one of those boxes, maybe two, you might be on to something, and it might be worth doing a quick assessment of it. So how to approach that is, you've got to be really realistic about the time that this can consume. One is, you probably need a time budget to set it up and learn. So, you know, go and see other people that have done it, go do your market research and all those things. It will take a fair bit of time. You know, a general rule of thumb is 1,000 hours to go learn about something. You know, it's a lot of evenings, a lot of afternoons, a lot of weekends going to see people if you really want to understand an intricacy of a business inside out. And then you might have a different time budget for once the business is set up to run and monitor it. Disciplines, I would imply, is no cross subsidy. So what I mean by that is that successful farm diversification is not about one bit of the farming business subsidizing the diversification, or even the other way around. And that's where I come to that commitment to farm performance, that, you know, if you've got a farming business that's performing well or not performing well, I would focus first on sorting that out before you look at the diversification. But once you've got it performing well, you then need to make a commitment to you and your other business partners that we are not going to let the performance slip just because we've got diversification. We want 1 + 1 to become 2, not 1 ± 0.5 to go backwards. In terms of assessing it, just move on to the next slide. It can be quite challenging if you've never, there isn't, you know, you can buy costing books for dairying and stuff like that. It's quite easy to do. It's a bit more tricky. There is some stuff out and about there, some trade shows and stuff that you might find helpful. So really you have to build a bit of a budget. You have to understand either occupancy or sales targets. Don't forget the VAT involved. So we also, as farmers, get very used to that all the products that we sell have no VAT on it normally. So once you start maybe renting somebody a tent site or a glamping place, in theory, you once, depending which business you do it through, but once you reach your turnover, or if you put it through the dairy business, you have to add VAT to it. So you might go, oh, glamping pods in my area are £100 a night. It doesn't mean you get £100 a night at the minute. Well, it's 5% at the minute, but it might be back to 20 soon. You know, you've got to net the VAT off it to what you actually get to keep in your bank account. You've got to go and make a stab at all the variable costs, and then you've also got to make an honest assessment of the contribution to the overheads and the time taken, and break it all down and be realistic. So my quick example of how to is a glamping site. This is a real glamping site that we once looked at somewhere in the UK, and we're looking at a 30 grand setup. And so we have to understand, if we are going to put some startup money into this, we have to write it off. So we're looking at here a 10-year write-off. So we've then got a 3 grand a year cost because we're going to set up some bell tents and build a toilet block. On to my next slide, I've got a bit of a detailed budget of how I would approach it. So on the left-hand side, you can see I've worked out all my 23 weeks of season, 65% occupancy. I've worked out all my nights. I've worked out my day rate of my tents after VAT, and that's giving my income. And then I've got some camping pitches as well that I've got a slightly different occupancy rate. So I know sort of the money I'm going to bring in. I've put some honest contributions down for the costs I'm going to have to incur that gets to my gross margin, and I've done a bit of a labour budget because I don't want to do this for free. So because it often, you know, if you maybe use John and Anna as an example, if one of these has to go run a diversification, they will have to employ more labour on the farm. So we have to cost the labour in, even if you're doing it yourself. So we've said that this could take 1,600 hours a year at £14 an hour, because that's our sort of standard rate. So it's going to cost me 22,400 out of my gross margin on labour. I've got to write off my 30 grand setup fee every 10 years. So I'm left with 14.5 grand, 30% of turnover and 40% return on capital. So this would be a goer. But you could do all those numbers, and if you end up at low percentage turnovers or low return on capital, I'd always be comfortable being quite cautious doing the budget. So you might, you know, there's a lot of tourism-based things coming out of the COVID year with terrific occupation rates, but you know, we can't always guarantee them as people start flying back to Spain and Portugal, whatever, in the summer rather than staying in a tent in Wales. So we have to be really honest about the realisticness of what we can do. You're probably better off writing the money off quicker. So you might argue, oh well, why don't you try writing off those tents over 5 years, and all the pitch off the 5 years. So even if then you're done, you've clawed all your money back in depreciation. So it's just about sitting down and doing your numbers and doing your proper assessment of time and depreciation to get yourself to a true profit figure. And I think, James, for me, that's done. I think are we going to do some more Q&As?
We've just had a couple of questions come in, Ollie. So first question, what do you see as the good types of farm diversification?
So if you break them down, it's often around what really suits that farm and those people in that area. So some people make a real success of like retail, so your farm shops, your vending machines, all those sort of things. So they can be successful for the right location and the right type of people. I think we have to be a little bit careful with some of the tourism stuff. I think we've had some really good years of, if you were involved in ag farm tourism in the last 2 years, we've had some bumper years of people holidaying in the UK. I'm a bit nervous now if people come to me and go, oh, I'm going to do glamping now. I'm going to put a thing up. I sort of go, you've got to be really good at it and have a passion, because it's going to get back to being quite competitive. So I'm just a bit nervous of them at the minute. But ultimately, there is no right or wrong answer. All those different types of either tourism-based, retail-based things, for the right people in the right locations, you can make a success of them. But if you don't, there is also examples of people not making a success of them. I've assessed a few farm diversifications where we boil it all down and we go, Christ, guys, for the hours you're putting in and the money you've got left at the end, you're slugging your guts out for £5 an hour while you're doing it. And so we often then have to challenge how we do it and why we do it, because there is a danger that people get sucked into the, wow, I've got another business, it's great, and they've got this income coming in, but they're just working crazy hours and they don't do the proper assessment of time and depreciation. So you might just get lost at gross margin level and think it's great, but then actually you need to do a true assessment of it.
Another question, Ollie, what percentage profit do other diversifications make?
So some of your retail ones are not as high as what you think. So you often think, wow, I'd love to be the supermarket, that's fantastic. And so actually some of your a really good farm shop might make 10 to 15% of turnover as profit at the end. But it's hard. That is hard to get to. A lot of them end up in single-digit percentage turnover as profit. Your tourism stuff and your more rental stuff is a slightly higher margin, so you wouldn't be surprised to see 30–40% profit. But you've got a lot of you might have to outlay a lot of asset for that. It's a bit like renting a house out almost. It's high percentage profit, but you've got a lot of capital outlaid. Yeah.
And I'm going to make this the final question. What's the minimum cost you would put labour at when assessing viability of a new business?
So we in our benchmarking, we are starting to put people in at 35,000 now, because we think for a level of skill and a level of determination, and maybe with a house or whatever, and that works out at £14 an hour for 2,500 hours. So traditionally we might have put £10 an hour in for certain jobs and we'd be happy at that, but I think we have to be honest about the way inflation's going, and it should really be in at whatever the opportunistic rate is. So if you're going to set up a tourism business and you think, well, how much would I have to pay to get a manager in to run this if I wasn't here? Well, that's the figure you should be putting in. But yeah, £10 to £14 an hour is how we would do our assessments at the minute.
That's great. Thanks, Ollie, and thanks very much for today. We've covered a lot of ground in today's webinar, but just final thoughts, words to John and Anna. As I say, we've covered a lot. What are your thoughts following discussions with Ollie? Are there any changes you're going to make?
There's a few things we're going to do. I don't know whether it was mentioned today, but things like partnership agreements, that sort of thing. We need in writing, so that the business is more secure if our elderly members on the other side disappear, and look at staff or labour hours worked, I think.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much to you both as well for being so open with figures and you know, attending today and discussion with Ollie. It's been really useful. One thing that I just wanted to promote, if people are interested in learning more about diversification, Farming Connect have an innovation and diversification event being held at the Royal Welsh Showground on Wednesday, the 15th of June. If you have a look at their website, there's more details there if you wanted to attend. But thanks again to our panelists today, to Ollie, to John and Anna, and to the audience for all the questions as well. You should get a follow-up email with the link of this recording and the links to the resources and tools which have been mentioned today. Keep an eye out on our social media platforms for any future webinars that we've got upcoming, and also please don't forget to register your business to vote in Shape the Future. You've only got until the end of March to register. If you haven't registered your business, you won't get a vote, so please do register. All that leaves me to say is to thank you for joining us on the webinar, and I hope that you found it useful. I want to reassure you that AHDB continues to be here for you, and your local teams would be more than happy to be here to hear from you if there's anything that we can do to help further. So thanks very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Cheers, bye.